The morning of May 8, 1945, began like any other for the men of the 11th Panzer Division. Cold, gray, and hungry. They were camped along a shattered road somewhere between Czechoslovakia and southern Germany, surrounded by forests burned black from artillery fire. But this time there was no thunder of guns. No command barked from an officer. Only the sound of boots crunching against wet mud, and the faint hiss of wind through the ruins. For the first time in years, the war had gone quiet, and that silence terrified them. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, one, then two, then a dozen more across the valley. To the soldiers it felt unreal. Bells had not rung freely in years. They were always silenced by air raids. Now the bells announced not victory, but defeat. Private Ernst Keller, only 21 years old, stared at his rifle as if unsure what to do with it. "They say Berlin is gone," he whispered. "They say the Führer is dead." His words hung in the mist. No one answered him. For weeks, rumors had swept through the ranks that Hitler had shot himself in his bunker, that the Americans were already in Munich, that entire divisions had vanished without orders. Yet every soldier still clung to one illusion, that something might turn the tide, that somehow the war wasn't really over. But that morning, when the radio crackled to life with the voice of Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, there was no more illusion. His message was calm, deliberate, almost detached. "German men and women, the Führer has fallen. The war is lost. We must lay down our arms." The words struck harder than artillery. For the men in the field, it wasn't just surrender. It was collapse. The ideology that had shaped their lives, the empire they'd fought for, gone in a single breath. Some stared blankly. Others cursed under their breath. A few laughed. A hollow, nervous sound that carried through the trees like madness. Lieutenant Hans Bauer, once proud commander of a tank platoon, walked over to his panzer, a steel monster that had carried him from France to the Eastern Front. He placed his hand on its scorched armor and whispered, "It's over, old friend." Then he opened the hatch, pulled out his sidearm, and threw it into the mud. Around him, soldiers followed suit. Rifles dropped, pistols clattered against the stones. Weapons that had once symbolized strength now felt like chains. Hours later, a small group of Americans arrived, jeeps rolling cautiously through the road lined with surrendering Germans. Their uniforms were clean, their faces calm. One of them, a sergeant with a cigar in his mouth, raised a megaphone and shouted, "Lay down your arms! The war is over! No gunfire, no shouting. Just the strange, quiet ritual of an army dissolving itself." The German soldiers stepped out of their formations. No one gave orders anymore. They placed helmets on the ground, hands raised, and waited. As they were searched and lined up, one young German whispered to another, "They don't look like monsters. The Americans didn't scream, didn't beat them. They offered water." One handed a cigarette to a trembling 19-year-old corporal who hadn't eaten in days. For the prisoners, it was the first moment of confusion and relief. The propaganda that had told them Americans were beasts, that they would kill every German on sight, shattered in an instant. Nearby, a medic tended to a wounded soldier from both sides, German and American bandages lying side by side in the dirt. That evening, the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Thousands of German soldiers, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, sat quietly in fields surrounded by barbed wire. No one spoke of victory or defeat. They simply listened, to birdsong, to silence, to life returning. For years they had known only the sound of war. Now that silence was unbearable. It was the sound of realization. The war was truly over, and for the first time, they didn't know who they were anymore. They began walking at dawn. The American trucks couldn't carry them all, so the rest marched, mile after mile down cracked roads littered with burnt tanks, horses, and twisted bicycles. The once invincible army of the Reich had become a column of ghosts, trudging silently toward captivity. Their boots stirred up dust over the ashes of the country they had fought to defend. Every few miles they passed villages reduced to rubble, churches missing steeples, farms gutted by fire. In some places, children stared from shattered windows. In others, There was no one left at all. For the first time, the soldiers saw what their war had done. Not to enemies, but to their own homeland. Private Ernst Keller, his uniform torn, carried a bundle of letters from his mother in Dresden. Each page was clean, careful, written in perfect cursive. But he knew the house she wrote from no longer existed. The Allies had burned Dresden to the ground months before. Now, as he passed another smoking town, the letters in his pocket felt like ghosts, too. Somewhere behind him, a man began to sing. The tune was broken, barely audible, an old marching song they used to chant with pride. Now its rhythm sounded like mourning. The Americans guarding them didn't interfere. They kept a steady distance, rifles slung casually, watching but never hostile. A few of the Germans expected punishment, even execution. None came. At one rest stop, a truck rolled by carrying American rations. Crates marked U.S. Army. Inside, the prisoners caught sight of things they hadn't seen in years. White bread, tins of meat, chocolate. A corporal muttered under his breath, "They eat like kings." Later that day, as hunger gnawed, one American sergeant tossed a loaf of bread toward the line. It landed in the mud. Nobody dared touch it. Only after a long pause did a German pick it up and split it into pieces, sharing silently with the men around him. That act, so small, so human, broke something inside them. It wasn't just defeat anymore. It was disbelief. Everything they had been told, about the enemy, about the cruelty of democracy, about the world beyond Germany, was unraveling with every step. When the column reached a bridge over the Danube, they stopped. Below, the water glimmered silver in the sunlight. The officer in charge of the march, Lieutenant Bauer, looked down at the river and said quietly, "The same water flows through Bavaria, through Vienna, through the empire that's gone." No one answered. That night, they reached a temporary holding camp, just open fields ringed with wire. No barracks, no bunks, only cold ground and fatigue. Thousands huddled together, too exhausted to speak. Some cried without sound. Others stared at the stars for the first time in years. American guards lit cigarettes in the dark, the glow flashing against their helmets. The prisoners watched, hypnotized. Those small dots of fire seemed to burn brighter than anything left in Germany. In one corner of the camp, a chaplain prayed softly in English. The words were foreign, but the tone was unmistakable. Forgiveness. A few men knelt instinctively, unsure whether they were praying to God or to mercy itself. By morning, the camp smelled of wet grass and surrender. Trucks rumbled in to take groups of prisoners deeper into the Allied zones. As each truck departed, dust rose and settled again, erasing footprints, erasing soldiers, erasing 1,000 identities. In the distance, someone said, "They say the Americans will take us across the ocean." Another replied, "Then maybe we'll see a country that still believes in tomorrow." No one laughed this time. As the convoy rolled away, the sun rose over the wreckage of Europe, bright, indifferent, and utterly silent. The war had ended, but the reckoning had only begun. The first thing they noticed was the smell. When the trucks rolled through the gates of the prisoner of war camp, the air carried scents none of them remembered. Baked bread, machine oil, fresh-cut grass. It didn't smell like war anymore. It smelled like life. The camp itself looked nothing like the nightmares they'd been told about. No dungeons, no torture, no shouting guards. Just long wooden barracks, tidy gravel paths, and men in clean uniforms handing out tin cups of coffee. A sign at the entrance read, "POW Camp Number 14, Geneva Convention applies." Some of the soldiers laughed bitterly when they saw it. They thought it was propaganda. Then an American officer, calm and polite, spoke through a translator. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work, you will eat, and you will live." No one believed him. Not yet. Inside the mess hall, the shock deepened. The food was hot. There was meat, potatoes, bread, more than most had eaten in months. One man wept quietly over his tray. Another stared at the American cook, unable to comprehend that his enemy was feeding him better than his own country ever had. In one corner, a black soldier joked with a white sergeant as they distributed rations side by side. For the Germans who'd been raised on ideas of racial purity, the sight was impossible. Yet here it was. Normal, routine, unremarkable. Days turned into weeks. Work details began. Repairing fences, building warehouses, clearing roads. For their labor, the prisoners earned small paper coupons they could spend in the camp store. Cigarettes, soap, chocolate. They wrote letters home, played chess, even started a small orchestra using instruments donated by local townsfolk. At night, music drifted over the barbed wire, soft, uncertain, but alive. Then came the books. The camp library opened with shelves of English and German titles. Hemingway, Thomas Mann, Remarque. Books they'd been forbidden to read in Germany. For some, the realization hit harder than any battlefield defeat. Ideas were free here. No censor, no fear, no secret police waiting in the dark. Private Ernst Keller borrowed All Quiet on the Western Front. He read it 3 times in silence. When he finished, he said only, "We were the same as them." The Americans held classes too. Languages, history, mechanics, even democracy itself. Professors from nearby universities came to teach. What began as curiosity became fascination. One former artilleryman spent hours studying blueprints for tractors. "With machines like this," he said, "we could feed everyone." An officer replied, "That's the idea." The prisoners began to see what their commanders never had. A society that thrived not through obedience, but through cooperation. A nation powerful because it wasn't afraid of freedom. Every morning they heard laughter from the guards. Real laughter. Careless, unforced. It wasn't the laughter of cruelty or victory. It was the sound of men unburdened by fear. And slowly the prisoners started to laugh too. By late 1945, news reached the camp that the war crimes trials had begun in Nuremberg. For many, shame replaced anger. They realized that while they had fought for Germany, they had also fought for a lie. In a letter found years later, one wrote, "We thought we were serving the fatherland, but what we saw here showed us the world we could have had. If only we'd believed in humanity instead of hate." When the time came for repatriation, few celebrated. They were going home to ruins, to a Germany they no longer recognized. Yet something inside them had changed. As they boarded the train back to Europe, an American sergeant saluted the departing column. Not mockery. Respect. One prisoner, the same Lieutenant Bauer who had thrown away his pistol months before, returned the salute. "We lost the war," he said, "but maybe, in this place, we found ourselves." The train doors closed. The engine roared to life. Through the dusty windows, the men watched America fade into the distance. The land that had conquered them not with weapons, but with decency. And for the rest of their lives, they would remember the day they realized the war was truly over. Not the day the guns fell silent. Not the day the flags came down. But the day they saw that mercy could be stronger than victory, and that freedom could break even the hardest chains.